This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 1st of April, 2021, and I am 2J.
I am 2M.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are, and they're not April Fool's headlines.
Related.
In the Daily Nation, it's official, Raila in State House race. In Standard, Raila's first step in race for presidency, and in the Star, handshake, Uhuru's call that settled Raila's fears. What are we reviewing today, guys?
Absolutely. It's a couple of hours to Good Friday, and the chicken sellers' Easter eggs are about to hatch.
Wow.
One thing in my mind is who's RUTO's favorite person in the Bible? Take a guess.
So this is an April Fool's
No,
rendition you're giving us.
it's an Easter
An
special.
Easter special.
But anyway, in case you don't know, you guess it right. It is Judas.
That's not what we guessed.
It's Judas Iscariot. And not because RUTO is Judas, no. But because Judas reminds him of Kikuyus. See, Judas was a hustler, a KYM. And rumor had it that he was also a Kikuyu from Kiharu in Muranga. In fact, his friends called him Dindi. Judas was Jesus' disciple, but he lived hand to mouth. The guy was broke.
Yeah.
Then one day, Judas had a rumor that some high priest called, we call him Caiaphas, because for Kayaba, Caiaphas, was looking for anyone who would help him capture Jesus. And the pay was good. So he took himself to Karen to meet Caiaphas. And Caiaphas lived very well. Man had a big mansion. He loved hosting other high priests and also Pharisees, the hypocrites. Anyway, when Judas alias Dindi got there, he was warmly welcomed. He ate sausages, mutura, burgers, chicken wings, and washed it all down with the finest moratina. He loved it. He could get used to this life. Then, out of nowhere, Caiaphas reached for his wallet and extracted 120 denarii. That was the currency those days. Adjusted for inflation in Kenya money, it's 120K, right? Plus 30 silver coins. Those about 4 times his monthly wages. Judas couldn't believe it. Cut long story short, Judas betrayed Jesus. And then Jesus was captured. Back to who RUTO's favorite person in the Bible is. And something tells me I should have added Caiaphas to the list.
What does that mean? Which version of the Bible are you reading, 2M?
I might have to reflect on that one.
Yeah, I think let's use this short break to reflect. So while 2M gave us an Easter special, I think I'll give us an Easter thought.
Yeah.
Again, I feel like I'm getting fed up with the headline, so I decided to take a tangent of my own.
Yeah.
And I'll start with history. On December 7th, 1941, Japan staged a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in the United States. This act led to the US entering World War II, but it also led to over 4 years of nationwide sacrifice to support the war efforts.
Yeah.
For 16 million Americans, that meant military service, conscription. For others, it entailed working in factories where tanks, torpedoes, and other kinds of weapons were made.
Yeah.
And for every American, regardless of occupation, personal sacrifice came in the form of rations that were imposed from everything from meat to sugar to firewood and medication, or even the institution of price controls on clothing to prevent inflation.
Correct.
So if you look at the ration system, people had to make decisions like, do I want to have a kilo of meat or do I want a loaf of bread? But people understood that. It was a logical proposition, but that's not to say that it made anybody happy.
Correct.
Workers weren't happy about wage control. Businesses weren't happy about price controls. And of course, landlords weren't happy about rent controls.
Correct.
But Americans accepted that it was a necessary evil for the survival of the country, and so people agreed to it.
Correct.
And so on March 15th, 2020, Kenya was also under attack.
Yeah.
But unlike the attack on Pearl Harbor, we were invaded by an invisible, silent, and microscopic enemy. And in the over 365 days since, we have had to make sacrifices as a country. Schools, churches, boda bodas, mamambogas, mitumba sellers, hoteliers, restaurants, bars. The backbone of the Kenyan economy has been brought to a standstill.
Yeah.
And many are struggling. And in my view, those who are promoting hashtag unlock our country and hashtag unlock our economy are not without a point. But the reality of Kenya's third wave is that some people are spared while others are suffering. Today, personal sacrifice is more important than ever. It's quite strange to point out that if sacrifice once meant joining the army or the mass mobilization of factory workers, today it means staying at home, closing your business, and social distancing. We have a new variant from Tanzania. Cases are rising and people are dying.
Yeah.
We need to see this as a short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit.
Yeah.
So I will end with the words of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni that he made last year. He said, "During a war, you don't insist on your freedom. You willingly give it up in exchange for survival. During a war, you don't complain about hunger. You bear hunger and pray that you live to eat again. During a war, you don't argue about opening your business. You close your shop and you run for your life. You pray to outlive the war so that you can return to your business." Thankfully, this army, our army as Kenyans, the coronavirus has a weakness and it can be defeated. It only requires our collective action, discipline, and forbearance.
I like that.
And that's my thought for the Easter break.
Yeah, and it's some good advice there. So today I'll take us back to the papers. All three of them spoke of Raila's confirmation in the 2022 presidential race. Now, unless you had been living under a rock the last few years, I mean, that was pretty obvious. So at the Fort Hall School of Government, we want to offer that Raila will have to work very hard to lose the presidential election of 2022.
Yep.
And that is if there is indeed an election.
Yes.
We want to tell Raila that the weight in the myth of Sisyphus has been lifted from him.
Yes.
Raila must not self-cannibalize in these last few months.
Yeah.
The race is between him and a man with a head of a coconut.
Yes.
His to lose.
Yes.
In this regard, this Easter, I want to dedicate a book to Raila Odinga, one of our Fifth Estate classics. It's called The Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And in the book, President Lincoln managed to bring these disgruntled opponents together to create the most unusual cabinet in American history.
Correct.
In the interest of uniting the country, propelling it forward, and preserving it for posterity, he co-opted his former political opponents, putting aside their former differences into a team of rivals, to bring together their efforts for the good of the nation. So for political survival, Raila must pay attention to forming his own winning coalition. Political survival for Raila then means creating this small coalition by being the hub for this elite consensus.
Yes.
Lincoln surrounded himself with a group of ambitious thinkers, not friends and allies who would just blindly support his opinion. Raila ought to borrow the same model. Embrace the one alliance if you must. The means will justify the end. And some things Raila should be ruthless about when he's forming his coalition. One, a ruling coalition needs to contain enough powerful members to win against any alternative coalition that may challenge it. And it needs to be self-reinforcing, in the sense that none of the sub-coalitions should be able to actually succeed and become the new ruling coalition.
True.
So be careful there. And lastly, historically, I want to reiterate that Raila has always garnered an average of 44% of the total vote. He is likely to continue to do so.
Correct.
History says so. Every election requires an object of aggression, and one has already been handed to him in the form of William Ruto. Sir, this is yours to take if there is an election. So with that, we had those headlines, and we had a three-part criteria. We asked ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? And the only one I thought that was thoughtful was standard. Raila's first step in race for presidency and how he will form the coalition.
What about the Daily Nation?
Guys,
No.
it's not like we did not know
We
he was
already
going to
knew
run.
he was in the race. It was obvious.
So we toss a star because they're always too wordy anyway.
Yeah, we're going with the standard as the winning headline.
Let's go.
There was no
dictator.
vote.
There was no, I'm a dictator in the sense.
I'm with the dictator today.
Excellent choice.
Now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Killing Jesus, a history by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard.
Before you get there, can I give a summary?
Go ahead.
So our final thought this week was inspired by stories and myths around the upcoming annual Christian holiday, Easter. And so we began on Tuesday by exploring the origins of the Easter holiday. We found out that the Bible doesn't actually authorize or endorse the annual Easter celebration. We delved into some of the customs and symbols that are associated with Easter, namely the Easter Bunny and Easter eggs, which have nothing to do with Christ. Instead, their inclusion into the holiday has something to do with the changing understanding of children. Though the origins of the holiday may be questionable, we here at the Fifth Estate choose to celebrate Easter because God lived the life we should have lived and died the death that we deserved, and did so that we could all live. And on Wednesday, we looked at the book, The Other Christs by Candida R. Moss. And the book studies the accounts of the deaths of martyrs in the days of the early church. It seeks to understand two things. The first is the ways that the martyr acts interprets the person and the death of Jesus. And the second is the manner in which this interpretation can inform our understanding of martyrdom in early Christianity. And today we're talking about the killing of Jesus.
Yes. I'll admit, I think the title is a bit jarring. It can be a bit tough to read and look at. But the book isn't just only about Jesus or his death. It's actually about the political and religious leaders, both Jewish and Roman, as they deal with the conflicts, rivalries, and fear, while trying to figure out what to do with this miraculous and threatening man called Jesus. So the book gives an in-depth detail as to the Roman history during that era and what happened politically that caused Jesus's death. So the first chapter outlines the world that Jesus was born into. So we see that Julius Caesar has been assassinated. The Roman Empire was split by back-to-back civil wars. Judea sat in the middle of that empire and was under the thumb of Roman emperors. So like many revolutionary leaders, Jesus appealed to the poor, but he was hated by the rich and powerful leaders like Herod Antipas, who was installed as a puppet ruler by the Romans in Judea. So Jesus was experiencing this growing popularity, and it really rubbed at the established order. Roman leadership, but also the Jewish religious leadership. That said, I think it's very important that we say that this book is not an academic treatise. The authors acknowledge very early on the difficulties in weighing the number of often conflicting historical sources. I think they detail at the end of the book how they looked at Roman history, Jewish history, and all of that as they compiled the book. They acknowledge that Jesus was not put to death by the Romans because of his economic protests, but they underplay the real reason, I think, that Jesus' name had become associated with that of the Messiah, the Christ, a longed-for figure who had become increasingly politicized. He would be not just anointed the king, but the ruler who would liberate the Jews from the Romans. So as far as the Romans were concerned, Jesus, one of the many would-be messiahs at this time, was therefore a seditious rebel whose crime was punishable by death. They say in the book, as a full-fledged member of the Jewish religious community from the age of 13, he knows he's accountable for his behavior and that blasphemous talk about being the Son of God will lead to a very public execution. The Jews would stone Jesus for such language, and the Romans might kill him for suggesting that he is their divine emperor's equal. So outrage against Rome had been building for decades. The people had been levied with tax after tax after tax. And Herod Antipas was, they call him, a lover of luxury. And he uses these taxes to rebuild his family's legacy and to finance his own lavish lifestyle. And the more luxury he needs, the higher the taxes climb. And the interest rates are quite crazy. You have 100% on oil, 25% on grain, and the falling behind of these debts mean that peasants are often forced to sell their children to creditors as debt slaves, or to sell their farms that they work on. Some lose their homes and inheritance, and as Jews who were Jewish people were very happy to have land. It was a point of pride. They end up having, this degraded life outside of normal society. So that's pretty much what the first chapter covers: the life in which Jesus entered into the world, what was happening, the circumstances,
the context.
I love it. I want to ask you guys a question. What would have happened if Pontius Pilate pardoned Jesus? How would the world look like?
I reflect on that often. Given how Islam and Christianity have been such instrumental sort of game changers for how we are, how we live our lives, how state is run, how everything is, how we organize everything that we do.
Absolutely.
When you call yourself a Christian state or a Christian nation.
Well,
very crazy.
Was that the right answer?
I don't know.
Is there a right answer?
I don't know. I don't think so, really. I don't think so. But again, let me just continue. It's very interesting that the people who surrounded Jesus were of questionable repute. In life and in death, the life of Jesus was a contradiction. he got along well with Mukoras. He saved prostitutes from being lynched or stoned. He was crucified between Mukoras. He was betrayed by a Mukora. It's no wonder murder, betrayal, deceit, hypocrisy are overriding themes across this book. But even more curiously, you can tell, even in how Jesus interacted with his disciples, he used a political framework to manage relationships. While exposing the Judas betrayal, for example, Jesus employed sneaky methods to calm the 12 disciples, only to drop the bombshell that one amongst them was the ultimate traitor. For instance, on the eve of his crucifixion, Jesus began the evening by humbling himself and washing each man's feet with water. And this was a task that was reserved for slaves and servants, and certainly not for a venerated teacher of that faith. Now, the disciples were touched by this show of service and the humility it implied. Jesus knows them and their personalities so well and accepts them without judgment. Simon was a zealot with passion for politics. Impulsive Peter, James, and John were boisterous sons of thunder, as Jesus described them, and they were intense and often gloomy. Thomas, the upbeat Andrew, the downtrodden Philip, and the rest. The time together changed the lives of every man in the room. And as Jesus carefully and lovingly rinses the road dust from their feet, the depth of his affection is clear. Then during dinner, Jesus drops the bombshell. He turns all the good vibes into despair and says, one of you will betray me. It is one of the 12. Judas, who was sitting on the left of Jesus, says, surely it is not I, Rabbi. But Jesus quietly responds, it is you. The man who Jesus trusted with his money is a man who sold him out. But just like in the streets, Jesus had no time for snitches.
Did you get that from Jay-Z?
Huh?
Is that a direct quote by Jay-Z?
Huh?
All right.
He says, when warning his disciples against betrayal, the Son of Man will go, just as it is written, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. This was a threat. He was basically saying, if you snitch or betray me, you get whacked. This made me ask, is it possible that the mafia are possibly inspired by Jesus?
Wow.
That's your takeaway?
Some Easter reflection there.
Yeah, Turam has really given us quite an interesting dose of the Bible today.
Right?
Me and my mom would be proud.
So it's so interesting. Looking through the book, I didn't read the whole book, but what I did like about it was that they pointed out the numerous times that Jesus found himself in a fix and managed to get himself out. And so Jesus had a stylistic tool. And the stylistic tool was answering a question with a question. So I'll take you to what has been said is one of the greatest conversations in recorded history. And it's recorded in the book, in 3 Gospels actually, in Mark, Luke, and Matthew. Mark 12:13, Luke 20:20. And so they say, later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, Teacher, we know that you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. But you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me, he asked. Bring me denarius and let me look at it. They brought the coin and he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And they were amazed at him. Now, the Caesar he's referring to is Tiberius Caesar, who was in power from AD 14 to AD 37. But it's simply a situation where Jesus was faced with, if I give them the answer that they want, that they shouldn't pay taxes,
don't pay the tax,
he will become public enemy number one to the Romans, and they couldn't afford that. And also he knew he was such a threat to them because he was here being, preaching the work of God and the Messiah and all these things. And so he knew that he had to be clever and get them to answer by themselves. And so who was asking these questions? It's the Pharisees and the Herodians. So basically the Pharisees were always trying to catch him in these traps, and you see that through the Gospels. The Herodians were also in on it. So the Herodians are a Hellenistic group is what they're called, who embraced Rome's secularism as it secured them with political power. And it seemed for them the best way for them to secure stability. And then you have the Pharisees, who were generally opposed to Roman culture, but embraced traditional Jewish teachings. But those two groups had a common denominator, which was their common dislike of Jesus and his group of growing followers.
Yeah.
But what I really liked, I think, about it was that often we're faced with the ways of the world.
Yeah.
And really what God tells us to do. And we're constantly faced with that even now, right?
Yeah.
And so he's telling us to arrive at our own conclusions, firstly. But I want to end with this. God says, give back to God what belongs to God. It's not just a physical duty we have to accomplish. It is a matter of our hearts. We do not just act in obedience, but rather are moved from deep within to give our lives back to him. We do not just give a part of us and retain a part so that we can have some control, but we surrender it all.
Yeah.
And so with all of this, you just say, God, I trust you. So this Easter, surrender it all. Say, God, I trust you. Have a lovely weekend, and have a good weekend. So on a day where we had winning headline from the Standard, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV, on GoTV, Prime Feature F, and Star Plus.
Happy Easter.
Bless.